The film industry is perhaps one of the most cutthroat and emotionally devastating professions in the entertainment world. One could very well make the argument that the phrase "separate the art from the artist" was made entirely to justify the downright deplorable actions of self-proclaimed or critically lauded artists, whether through their heinous abuses of power over those outside or inside their social circles, or by displaying superiority with their cast and crew. As the art of film has reached over a century of inception, a societal shift is starting to make its way into the backbone of our entertainment. Widely diverse stories and themes that would rarely, if ever, get touched on in the golden age or even the brat era of Hollywood are becoming more acknowledged and celebrated. But still, as the times are a-changin', so does how we analyze art, and by extension, the artists. For some, the transgressions an artist makes in either their work or in their personal lives creates a brand new way to analyze their creations, almost like a backdoor psychological evaluation by way of trial by public. Others, however, are more content to treat the creations of these artists as a vacuum, totally separated from drawing parallels in the personal or professional lives, and want to touch only on the themes that are intended for the art and the art alone. While there's nothing inherently wrong with either approach to analysis, it's almost always meant to highlight the worst aspects of a person's life, confirming the darkest parts of creation. But this doesn't mean that it should be inherently negative, because refusing to separate the art from the artist can be incredibly insightful and meaningful. After all, if we are to learn anything not only as filmmakers, but also as people, it's important to shine a light on the ones who provide us entertainment and what experiences they drew from their personal life that inspires their art. Because like it or not, art lives forever. And an artist can either inspire or draw ire. With all of that said, Kevin Smith is probably the last person anyone would think of when it comes to the ethical quandary of separating the art from the artist because, well, most people are adverse to even think of him as an artist to begin with. Unlike a lot of other filmmakers and artists that are associated with the discussion at hand, Smith doesn't exactly make what one would consider prestige films. Between his quirky stoner comedies, his indie dramedies, his work for hire in the action genre and the CW, the experimental horror films that he's done, and whatever the hell you call yoga hosers, Smith doesn't exactly lend much to a discussion to be had because, well, a lot of people don't really think there is much of a discussion to be had. And yet, despite any shortcomings he's had in recent years, he's still a much-beloved writer-director who sells out screenings on the road, manages to write comics for both DC and Marvel featuring their most beloved and iconic characters, and is very much kept on the pulse of the pop culture zeitgeist that he's creating the Netflix reimagining of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. For God's sake, he's immortalized in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, fight zombies in Call of Duty, and can fight DC characters in Lego Batman.
Man, they told me I was coming to direct a hard-hitting documentary on everyday life in the Batcave, not this garbage.
For better or worse, Kevin Smith has become a huge fixture in the pop culture landscape. But how is it that a regular Joe Schmo from the suburbs of New Jersey found himself in the Hollywood spotlight? In other words, what's the deal with Kevin Smith? It's certainly strange to think of a time where Kevin Smith was seen as an independent film idol before he was known as the guy who smokes weed and makes movies about Canada. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a boom in the independent film scene. Films like Sex, Lies, and Videotape by Steven Soderbergh, Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee, and especially Reservoir Dogs and El Mariachi by Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez were dominating the landscape, giving way to a huge boom of artists who made the films they wanted to make, and most, if not all, created huge names for themselves and developed their own cult of personality. And in the midst of this shift in the cinematic status quo, Kevin Smith arose with A Festival Darling, a quaint black and white indie slice of life about two clerks who work at a convenience store and a video store, known simply as Clerks. It's interesting, because compared to the movies that were released around the same time as Clerks, there wasn't a lot that made it stand out, at least not on the same level. It wasn't as violent or as visceral as Reservoir Dogs, it wasn't action-packed or adrenaline-pumping like El Mariachi, nor was it socially conscious as Do the Right Thing or as philosophical as the film that inspired Clerks' inception, Richard Linklater's breakout film Slacker. But yet, the impact that Clerks has is entirely unparalleled, with his films giving way to the stoner comedies of the 2000s, to even paving the way for Judd Apatow's career to take off with films like Knocked Up, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and most recently, The King of Staten Island. What on the surface looks like an hour and a half of retail work seen through the eyes of a slacker paints a unique picture for an entire generation. More so than any of the other breakout films of this decade, Clerks, and by extension the earlier films of Smith's career, portrays Generation X perhaps more truly than any other film at that time attempted. Kids straight out of high school but in between or dropped out of college, overeducated and underrespected, talking about the entertainment they love to fight off the fact that authority and elders look down upon them.
I'd like to get paid to sit on my ass and watch TV. I walked in there the other day, that son of a bitch was sleeping.
I'm sure he wasn't sleeping.
Are you calling me a liar? Are you calling me a liar?
No, he's probably just resting his eyes.
What the hell is that, resting his eyes? What, like he's some air traffic controller?
Actually, that's his night job.
Wise ass too, huh? Go ahead, keep cracking wise. That's why you're jockeying to register in some fucking local convenience store instead of working on a steady job.
And clearly, the critics agreed with this sentiment, as Clerks remains Kevin Smith's highest-rated directorial feature on Rotten Tomatoes. Even though none of his films since then have surpassed the reception of his feature film debut, the picture he paints of this generation is palpable and clearly struck a chord with audiences, as Mallrats, Dogma, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back remain cult classics, and Chasing Amy is his second highest-rated film critically. From the strength of these films, he was seen as an independent darling on the same level as the filmmakers mentioned before, even being heralded by Andrew Sarris of Esquire as the next Scorsese. A sentiment I'm positive even Kevin Smith finds hilarious upon hindsight. So what happened? Well, by Smith's own admission, everything seemed to change after Jersey Girl. Working with the biggest budget of his career, as well as a more professional crew, Smith chose to break away from the Askewniverse, as it was starting to be known as, in order to move forward with his career. It was a huge risk. As he explains,
I was terrified, as I have a great relationship with the fanbase and I interact with them on a regular basis. And I try to have a great kinship, as without them I do not have that job. The 13 to 14 year olds that love Jay and Silent Bob swearing all the time will not like this film. But you can't live your life catering to them, or else you become Michael Jackson, as I need to serve myself first and make something that I'm connected to, and hope that the audience will follow me as they have so far.
Smith was arguably more bare in Jersey Girl than any of his other films. We'll come back to that later. But sadly, it wasn't given the chance to flourish his career. And while quality might have something to do with that, not saying it's a masterpiece or anything, but it's not nearly as bad as Smith makes it out to be. The paparazzi and Hollywood might have had a thing to do with it.
Entertainment Tonight, the most watched entertainment news program in the world. and that wedding thing. Is that thing planned yet?
No, not yet.
Are you getting closer to it?
Why do you ask me these questions when you know the answers? You can just tell everybody. It's not planned yet. We have no date. Nothing's happening. I know.
I can ask her almost anything.
Ben Affleck was seemingly swooped up from Hollywood and made a leading man after his critically praised performances both in Smith movies as well as other films that won him awards. And perhaps bigger than his screen presence was his personal life. The general public seemed very much in love with Ben Affleck and his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez being together more than the movies that they were in together. Geely is one of the biggest box office bombs ever. So when Jersey Girl came out, the fallout of Geely bled into the reception of the film. People heard about Bennifer being in a film together again and didn't show up to the movies. And a lot of critics jumped on the stars and, by extension, Kevin Smith. It was PG-13, it was about family, it was overly sentimental, it didn't connect to his Askewniverse. Jason Mewes didn't even get to participate because of reasons we'll get into later. It marked the lowest point for Kevin Smith at that point. One that Smith would take to heart. The reception wasn't terribly negative, though, because Jersey Girl has had a cult following since its release, as with most of his films, and he even had a film critic in his corner.
A lot of attention has been paid recently to the quality of the dialogue in Pulp Fiction, but Kevin Smith has the same ear for colorful speech. His characters are dropouts from Generation X, looking at life with a great deal of dubious distrust and talking about love and marriage as if they were anthropologists from another planet.
Roger Ebert was enthusiastically excited for Smith's career, enjoying 5 out of the 6 films he'd done up until this point, Mallrats being the exception. And he had said in his Jersey Girl review,
Smith is a gifted writer, and I believe he knew exactly what he was doing by assembling these old reliables. I am not sure he couldn't have done better, but by then we liked the character so much that we give the school play a pass.
So it's all the more surprising that when Smith decided to go back to the well in Clerks 2, he was met with a less than enthusiastic response. People derided the film from the get-go, seeing it as him turning coat the second he had a bad experience outside of his familiar circle, and likewise saw it as him trying to leech off of the success of his breakout film. Afterwards, he never really seemed to rise to the cream of the independent crop. His filmmaking peers had long since evolved creatively, and new filmmakers on the rise seemed at first glance to do the things he was doing in the 90s before the more gritty and confusing aughts. Even his first film after returning to the Quick Stop, Zack and Miri Make was unfairly compared to Judd Apatow's filmography, with Knocked Up, Superbad, and The 40-Year-Old Virgin becoming surprising box office hits. In comparison, Zack and Miri was a box office bomb, widely rumored to be because Harvey Weinstein was starting to see Smith's star wane and tried to bury the film, causing a shift in their partnership that started to expose Smith to the kind of person he was. As Smith lamented at the time,
I'm sitting there thinking, that's it, I'm gone, I'm out, the movie didn't do well, and I killed Seth Rogen's career. This dude was on a roll until he got in with the likes of me. I'm a career killer. Judd Apatow's going to be pissed, the whole internet's going to be pissed because they're all like Seth, and the only reason they like me anymore is because I was involved with Seth. And now I fucking ruined that. It was like high school. I was like, I'm a dead man, I'll be a laughingstock.
the nail in the coffin seemed to be a 1-2 punch in bad publicity, with him infamously being kicked off an American Airlines flight due to his weight.
But Kevin Smith has brought this to light, and I'm interested in what you think.
I'm sorry, if I'm flying and you halfway in my seat,
Yeah.
you like to get your fat ass out my seat.
Southwest later apologized and gave him a refund, but Smith is still mad about it, and he's using the internet to try to keep pressure on the airline.
You know, they, on the other hand, I think have to admit that, yes, it's don't play off obesity like it's just another lifestyle. It's not. It's real bad for you. And we should have taxes. If we're going to have taxes on cigarettes, we should have it on crappy
So it's basically, we're not going to give you shit for being fat, but do know that you're fat.
And are we charge them for it.
And know that no one wants to be wedged between a window and Kevin Smith.
As well as the 2010 film Cop Out, the first feature film that wasn't solely written by him, as well as his first foray into the action genre, but was marred with behind-the-scenes clashes with Hollywood's drunk uncle Bruce Willis. It would never be easier to write off Kevin Smith than right here, as Cop Out remains his lowest-rated film he's ever directed, with a meager 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. It called into question Smith's career as a whole, since the only films people knew him for were movies involving a stoner duo, slackers, and a bad Bruce Willis film. Films that he was rumored to be making, such as a superhero film in The Green Hornet, a sequel to Fletch, and even for a time a Superman reboot starring Nicolas Cage and directed by Tim Burton, never came to fruition, and his strengths as a writer were rarely seen due to the poor reception of his films. On top of that, after the lukewarm to downright dismal reception of his recent films up until that point, he went to war with film critics and declared that he was not going to allow critics to screen his work for free. Smith reflected upon this time thusly.
If I were to write at that point in my life, it would be about the poor fat kid whose movies didn't make enough money.
From the outside looking in, this seemed to be a bookend to the career of Kevin Smith. A man who was once declared an independent filmmaking icon was now cast out, considered nothing more than a funny man who had blown his shot to be taken seriously as an artist. But that's not true now, is it? See, while it sounds weird after building it up as so, despite the perception of Kevin Smith as an artist that the general public had up until this point, he wasn't just a flash in the pan when it came to writing about a select generation of people. You have to understand that around the time of Chasing Amy, he had built up a reputation for being an amazing writer, as his script for the film was passed around all over Hollywood, garnering the attention to write treatments for blockbusters that were gestating behind the scenes, such as the aforementioned Superman script that thankfully never saw the light of day. And believe it or not, Hollywood wasn't the only place he got a lot of attention from. After shining the light on the comics industry in his films, what with the inclusion of a Stan Lee cameo in Mallrats,
holy shit!
As well as having Chasing Amy revolve around comic creators, he's been given the keys to the kingdom, as it were, to dip his toes not just in the Marvel Universe, but even DC Comics as well. Yes, the man that wrote 37 Dicks and talked about Superman needing a kryptonite condom in order to sleep with Lois Lane.
How did I go from the verge of hot Floridian sex with Brandy to man of still coital debates with you in the food court?
Kyrgyzstan is not part of the food court.
Found himself writing critically acclaimed stories for Daredevil, Batman, even Spider-Man and Black Cat. He was instrumental in bringing Marvel Comics back in style in the late 90s with the Marvel Knights imprint, with his storyline with Joe Quesada called Daredevil Guardian Devil being the linchpin that was bringing such creatives as Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Millar into the Marvel fold. The fact that he was mostly well known at that point for his film credentials helped legitimize comics to the wider public.
And that was always the hope for Joe. Joe was like, you could be the bridge. He saw it. I didn't. Joe was just like, you made it okay for people who always had those leanings to now reach out. Kevin Smith wrote Daredevil. So they had a name to throw out there, which at that point had legitimacy. Thank God they didn't do it now, because they'd be like, from the director of Tusk, Daredevil, they'd be like, we don't want any of that.
Even his film projects that never saw the light of day ended up finding new life on the page. His screenplays for The Bionic Man and The Green Hornet were published as full-on storylines. And while his propensity for deadlines is legendarily shoddy, what with his second Daredevil story only lasting one issue, and his second Batman story, The Widening Gyre, still being delayed to high hell, he's built up a name for himself in the world of comics as a towering writer, on the same level as his idols Stan Lee, Frank Miller, and Alan Moore. And it's not just the world of comics that Smith excelled at, but also public speaking. Ironically, for a man known for playing a character called Silent Bob, he sure knows how to talk.
Oh God. She's giving him head.
He's been selling out concerts at universities and venues where people gather to listen to him tell stories about his personal life, to even anecdotes about his time in the Hollywood spotlight. You get a wide variety of topics, such as the time he directed a Prince documentary that never saw the light of day.
And people start coming into the room, and I would say about 20% of them, as they walk in, are like, Silent Bob.
His feud with director Tim Burton after watching Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
And I was flabbergasted, taken aback, because I'm just like, I'm used to fucking saying shit about people left and right. Nobody ever says anything back because people are fairly political. But for one brief moment, Tim Burton was just like, the gloves are off. Let's go.
To more intimate fare, like recalling the moment his dad died in the hospital.
Good fucking dude. Good dude. Deserved way better than to die screaming. But that good dude, he did die screaming. And I remember thinking, oh my God, in this world where even a good man like my old man is gonna die screaming, there's no point in not trying to achieve every fucking dream that I have.
He's just a naturally entertaining person, and he understands this on some level, as he's perhaps a pioneer in the podcasting world since the inception of the Smodcast network in 2007. Almost every week, Smith, along with friends and family, will talk for hours on end about either pop culture or the things going on in their personal lives. The only other person that matches this level of success in this medium is, I don't know, Joe Rogan maybe? Oh my God. Even in TV, Smith has found some mild success and reverence. Like with most of his View Askewniverse output, his animated Clerks series had a short life, but a long-standing cult following. And surprisingly, he has a great relationship with the CW, directing the pilot for Reaper, an underrated supernatural comedy show about a kid who finds out his father sold his soul to the devil, as well as being a huge fixture in the Arrowverse. To date, he's done 3 episodes of The Flash, one of which he brought Jay and Silent Bob into, 4 episodes of Supergirl, and he's not done there. As mentioned before, he's got an anime reboot in the works with Netflix for Masters of the Universe with an all-star cast, he's directed episodes of The Goldbergs for ABC, and he's got a series developing with BBC America based on Todd McFarlane's comic series Sam and Twitch. The man is successful and talented, there's no question about it. But why is he so loved? How has he endured in the public eye for going on damn near 3 decades? Because let's be honest, charm can only get you so far. There's something about Kevin Smith that resonates with people, to the point where he's amassed such a ride-or-die fan base that they'll stick by him even after Jersey Girl, after Cop Out, after Yoga Hosers? To put it bluntly, what makes Kevin Smith so special? I think the answer is Kevin Smith himself. So the philosophy of separating the art from the artist dates back to well before the Lumiere brothers even thought about shooting a single frame from a train station. But the 2 most common sources come from new criticism in the early 1940s, and essentially literary science to only analyze poetry and stories on their own to derive meaning from them as they were written, and the 1961 essay The Death of the Author by Roland Barthes. The central idea is that by creating art, the author essentially creates a life of its own and therefore must be analyzed without the baggage of the author, and if it cannot be meaningful in its own merits, then it's a poor work of art. New criticism was a lot more strict on that rule, but it was Barthes who tried to expand on it in a more meaningful way, stating that
refusing to assign a secret, an ultimate meaning liberates what may be called an anti-theological activity. An activity that is truly revolutionary, since to refuse meaning is, in the end, to refuse God and his apostates, reason, science, law.
Now, there were a lot of criticisms to this line of, well, literary criticism. As revered as Barthes was in his line of thinking, it also had with it a fair share of ridicule, with French philosopher Michel Foucault giving a lecture in 1969 titled, "What is an Author?" that was basically interpreted as a thinly veiled response and attack to Barthes' ideas presented in The Death of the Author, going so far as to say,
"The author is a certain functional principle by which, in our culture, one limits, excludes, and chooses. The author is therefore the ideological figure by which one marks the manner in which we fear the proliferation of meaning."
Not only that, but it's even been joked about as being a literary critical Kobayashi Maru. Taking it seriously means you fail at literary analysis, but treating it as satire means you understand the art. But I know what a lot of you are thinking. Up until this point, I've been trying to look at the works of Kevin Smith in a vacuum, trying my hardest to only look at his work on its own, but I think that severely devalues his appeal as an artist. There's no influx of video essays that analyze his films and try to see whether or not his movies hold up, and for the most part, they only focus on the films as they interpret them. Quirky slice-of-life comedy, a loud studio comedy, a dated if earnest indie dramedy, a religious comedic epic, a meta-farce, a generic mean-spirited sequel. Yoga hosers. I'm sorry, that's the last time I joke about it. Amongst all these videos, though, the one that perhaps inspired me the most to make this video was probably the most critical of the bunch. Patrick H. Willems uploaded a long-teased video called, "Do Kevin Smith's Movies Hold Up?" The short answer from him is... The long answer from him is... As he says in his video, in particular about Clerks 2,
"Look, I know I'm the guy who loves finding subtext in movies that reflects the filmmaker's own lives, and I do it in like every video, but sometimes it's just right there. Kevin Smith tried to move on from the View Askew universe movies. Jersey Girl was for him what moving to Florida is for Dante. And this movie is him accepting that he can never leave, that he'll just stay in his lane and be the ruler of this insular world, only playing to his adoring fans."
Now, I have a lot to say about Clerks 2 that I may expand on at some point in the future, but I can't help but feel that this assessment of Smith reverting into more and more of a cartoonish caricature of himself to just be, well, cynical and plain wrong. You see, the magic of Smith's movies, the reason why he still gets a lot of hype whenever his name is attached to a new project, is because you are never, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are seeing him on the screen, for better and worse. It's no secret that Richard Linklater is Kevin Smith's inspiration as a filmmaker, but it's almost eerie how similar they are with each other, albeit on diametrically opposed points of view. Linklater was a very educated and philosophical man, falling into film as a way to start talking about the things that he wants to talk about. As Smith was a man who fell in love with pop culture and saw film as the gateway to showing his world to people. Prior to even thinking about filmmaking, Kevin Smith was aimless, straight out of high school, bouncing from dead-end job to dead-end job, with no real ambition for anything higher.
I might have missed the boat. This summer, I break up with my girlfriend, presumably for good, leaving me lots of free time. She tells me I'm directionless. I'm not pursuing anything, just working in the store. She's going to college. She's on a fast track. I'm realizing I am directionless, and suddenly we are on the outs, and I have nothing to do.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? That was Smith's mindset before he saw Slacker and realized he wanted to be a filmmaker. Roger Ebert once described Clerks as being so utterly authentic that its heroes haven't even heard of their generation, that when they think of X, it's on its way to the video store. That's probably the closest understanding to the appeal of Smith's seminal film as I've ever read. Clerks is so honest and real because it's an extension of the world Smith lived in for the better part of his 20s. Dante, for better or worse, is Kevin Smith as he is, while Randall is Kevin Smith as he wants to be. I mean, for Christ's sake, he was originally going to play Randall, as if to drive the point further. The decision to move forward in his life was always going to be on him, and he could either stand by and wait for something to happen, or take a chance and forge his own path. Mallrats carries on the themes of aimlessness, albeit in a much more approachable and studio-driven way, as he clearly still has some demons that need exorcising from his personal life.
I think about the people who make decisions that affect our lives. I think about how those people are out there every day, making a difference, leading big lives, and how they only concern themselves with peers and company that apply to their goals and noble causes.
Jesus, I'd hate to tell you what I think about when I'm in the bathroom.
I think about all that and I cry. Because I have nothing better to do than fuck you.
Chasing Amy is almost inseparable from Smith, as it's such a naked look at the relationship between him and Joey Lauren Adams. A fact that Smith himself highlights when talking about it.
Watching this film, the viewer can find me in every nook and cranny. The character of Holden is the closest to me I've ever written. Casting Ben was aesthetically wishful thinking perhaps, and Alyssa is actually my voice of reason that I'd never listened to. I knew what I was doing was immature, but you can't fight City Hall sometimes.
In a sense, all of his films are like that. The exception being maybe Cop Out. Smith has gone on record as seeing Dogma as a way to vent all of his frustrations about the Catholic faith, and being able to explore that side of himself proved to be controversial, but genuinely rewarding.
I don't think it stands for anything positive.
What does it stand for?
I don't know, but I've been told not good.
Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a live-action cartoon, but within the film are the doubts of the kind of career Smith had built up until that point. Holden McNeil, if he's to be believed as the surrogate of Kevin Smith, postulates that people need to grow past weed and dick and fart jokes.
You gotta grow, man. Did you ever want anything more for yourself?
The Hollywood setting isn't just an excuse for Smith to go wild with his comedy, but it comes from a place of genuine understanding, as that was the world he was immersed in as a writer for the latter half of the 90s. It can even be seen as a cry for help towards Jason Mewes, showing that the level of excess he was living in, at the time being a horrible battle with drug addiction, could alienate him from the rest of the world. And sure enough, it did. For a while after Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Smith and Mewes were on the outs.
Because it was getting harder and harder to clean Jason Mewes up in advance of every film.
Kevin was gonna put the kibosh on the characters because of my drug use and how hard it was to, get me sober and all that stuff, the whole process of it.
And we had fights, and it was just heartbreaking. Like, the dude was just too dialed into heroin.
Because on Clerks,
just drinking and smoking weed.
Mallrats,
just drinking. Oh, well, drinking and smoking weed a little bit.
Chasing Amy.
I was on dope, Dogma, coke, and dope.
Jizzle and Bizzle.
Drinking, and at the last week I was on painkillers.
Jersey Girl.
I wasn't there.
Jersey Girl was his window into opening up about fatherhood, a topic that clearly speaks to Smith even now. What might have started out as a fear of having to divide his time between what he wants to do and what he loves to do, evolved over the course of his career of prioritizing what he loves, to even finding new ways to express that love with his family. As terrible as Yoga Hosers is, the fact that Kevin Smith made it so that way he could collaborate with his daughter and use his career path as a way to bridge the worlds he and his daughter are in together, it's a beautiful idea, even if it doesn't work entirely.
I remember, that day going home, and the first person I saw was not you, but Jennifer. And she was like, how was it? And I was like, I think my daughter saved me today. She was like, what? And I told her, I was like, I think she may be my salvation. Like, that kid made it fun again. Like, I felt like I was 21. Yeah, it was a huge moment for me. Don't do that. But it was. I was like, I think that kid may have made all the difference. Like, I get it now. You made me want to be a better filmmaker more than anyone in this world, because I was like, oh, I could be useful to her.
Even Jay and Silent Bob Reboot expands on the fears of potentially being too far gone from your loved ones, and how at the end of the day, it's never too late to have a family.
I'm just here to prop up my kid so she can put on the show of her life, like my parents did for me, like theirs did before them. And if you're lucky enough to have a kid, the trade-off is you don't really get a third act to your story, because the story changes. All of a sudden, it's not about you anymore. For the first time in your self-involved life, that's okay. Kids are like our reboots. Another chance to tell a brand new version of the same old story. I know I'm supposed to be teaching Amy stuff, but it's like I'm learning from her every day.
Clerks 2 is perhaps the most personal of his filmography aside from Chasing Amy, and it isn't because it's a monument to mediocrity, but it's because it's him learning how to love and accept himself. The doubts created in Hollywood after the failure of Jersey Girl, the lukewarm response of his previous efforts with his famous characters, and the failure to launch his franchise efforts, it's him proving that he's still got something to say.
I'd like to get back to doing something more personal, like our first book.
Well, when are you going to do that?
I have something personal to say.
Filmmaking could be as soul-sucking as working a 9-to-5 in a fast food restaurant, and the more you conform to the ideas of what others think you should be, it forces you down a path that you aren't ready for or aren't compatible with. Jersey Girl was him working with almost none of his familiar faces, save for Ben Affleck, Scott Mosier, and George Carlin, trying his hardest to make a grown-up film that moved away from what he was known for and was unfairly maligned by the general public. Clerks 2 shows him learning to not completely reject what it was that made him unique, but rather embrace it and learn from it. True progress lies not in one extreme or the other, but in the happiness one finds in what they're doing, and finding a good support group to help guide you on the right path. That support group in this case being Smith's friends and family. There's no shock that a lot of his films share the same actors. Everyone he's worked with considers him family, from the CW to Clerks, and he loves to express that through his work. They encourage him to explore further within himself, such as in the latter part of his career with movies like Red State and Tusk, being inspired by friends close to him and their struggles with being LGBTQ in the face of overwhelming bigotry like Fred Phelps in the Westboro Baptist Church, and the fun of being able to sit around and tell stories to an entire group of people while also being a meta-commentary on the inherent negativity that comes with the internet. And yet, there's a giant elephant in the room that we cannot ignore when talking about Kevin Smith's legacy. It is true, he wouldn't even have a career if it wasn't for Harvey Weinstein. He picked up Clerks at the Sundance Film Festival and helped get Smith out of debt that he had been in during the production of Clerks. He's produced 7 out of the 13 films he's made so far, and Smith even named a production company for Red State after him. However, this overlooks a crucial fact that Weinstein and Smith haven't had a positive business relationship after the premiere of Red State.
So I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, fuck it, I do it. And I get up, and I swear to you, may God struck me dead if this didn't happen. I pull the curtain over, I go, hey! And he looks over and I go, shut the fuck up! And he goes like this. And I said, yeah, shut the fuck up. I would never do this to you. I would never come to one of your screenings and act like an asshole. Shut the fuck up!
On top of that, while yes, his films have been funded by an absolutely horrible human being, Smith's films are the ultimate antithesis of Weinstein's character. Even if his tropes may be dated, he's clearly an ally for the LGBTQ community, loves strong women who stand side by side with his slacker characters that bemoan the system that pushes them down, and almost always lets his female characters have agency when it comes to their own bodies as well as their sexuality.
I love you. But I'm not your fucking whore.
And of course, this all came to a head on October 7th, 2017, the day the Me Too movement began. Harvey Weinstein, after years of not speaking to Kevin Smith following the explosive blow-up at the Sundance premiere of Red State, reached out to Smith mere days before the New York Times expose released to the public and tried to buy out Smith by pitching him a sequel to Dogma, the only film of Smith's that he and his brother Bob personally own. Of course, Smith knew there was something off about the pitch, but I don't think anyone expected what came next.
Now to the latest on Harvey Weinstein. The New York Times reporting allegations by numerous women who say the Hollywood mogul sexually harassed them. His alleged victims over nearly 3 decades include stars like Ashley Judd and Rose McGowan.
The ousting of Harvey Weinstein's deplorable acts cannot be dismissed, as it really was a cultural shift in the 2010s. Hollywood has had a long history of these types of figures reigning tall, and they would always have with them a hefty belt of friends that would defend them, equally as powerful and ready to keep the status quo the same. As unfortunate as it is, it's easy to see that Weinstein thought he could keep Kevin Smith in his pocket, like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I couldn't possibly be a monster like the media makes me out to be, and you better stay on my side. I made you. And it was clearly something that Smith took to heart. As weeks later, after mulling it over, he took to the Hollywood Babble-On podcast and acknowledged his privilege in the film industry compared to the victims of Weinstein. He then announced full-on, almost as a big middle finger to Harvey Weinstein himself, that he would be donating his residuals for all of his View Askewniverse films made under Miramax to the charity Women in Film, so that way he can rectify some of, if not all, the damage he had done to all the victims of Weinstein's wrath, either career-wise or even health-wise, with his silence. Perhaps the most telling thing about Smith's character is this statement he made during the episode, wherein he basically says that if he were given the opportunity to turn everything back and not have to be tied to Weinstein in any way, he'd do it in a heartbeat, with no hesitation to what he'd lose because, well, it's all just movies at the end of the day.
My entire career is tied up with the man. It's been a weird fucking week. I just want to make some fucking movies, that's it. That's why I came, that's why I made Clerks. And no fucking movie is worth all this. Like my entire career, fuck it, take it. It's wrapped up in something really fucking horrible.
It's a lot to think about when it comes to weed jokes and Cheech and Chong-esque characters, but I think that's why he's endured for so long. In a review for Clerks 2 for the New York Times, the film is described as having a dirty mind, but a pure heart. In essence, that's perhaps the most perfect description of Kevin Smith not only as an artist, but as a person. The sincerity that he throws at everything he does, even if he's not always the best person to execute such ideas, is universal. From the Catholic guilt and doubt of Bethany and Dogma, to Matt Murdock's existential fears and doubts in Guardian Devil, Brett Reed Jr.'s aimless wandering in opulence in The Green Hornet, to even the love Jay feels for his daughter in Reboot, it's all from the one place that matters the most: his heart. In 2018, Kevin Smith suffered a major heart attack that, if not dealt with as promptly as he did, would have ended his life. In that time since, he's especially prioritized the films that he's wanted to tackle. While it might be seen as going back to the well for yet another point in his life, it's a place that he feels more than secure with. Jay and Silent Bob Reboot was him recapturing not the glory of his past characters, but the energy and motivation to be a filmmaker again. As he says in an editorial he wrote for the Academy of Motion Pictures,
"It was nice to crawl up back into the attic and pull down old toys and start playing with them again. Because you tend to feel old after you have a heart attack. Suddenly playing with my 90s toys, I felt young again."
And perhaps this is the most evident in his next project he's got lined up, Clerks 3. The story behind it has changed significantly. Originally described as the Empire Strikes Back of the Clerks story, but was also a lot more depressing and cynical, no doubt a result of the mindset he found himself in post-Cop-Out. I think a clear-cut example of the change of heart Smith had with his career is in hearing what the film revolves around nowadays.
Randall has a heart attack, decides that he came so close to death and his life has meant nothing, and in the recovery he comes to the conclusion that at midlife, having almost died, having worked in a movie store his whole life and watched other people's movies, he tells Dante, he's like, "I think we need to make a movie." And so Dante and Randall make Clerks. That's the story of Clerks 3.
Some people are upset that he didn't follow the same plotline that he was originally going to do, but he's said since that he doesn't want to ruminate on that cynical part of him, instead focusing on the optimistic side of himself, how it's never too late to change your life. And in essence, it's where a lot of his more personal and fully realized stories find themselves. Brody and T.S. are able to grow and appreciate their girlfriends. Matt Murdock finds beauty in wearing the crimson cowl. And Dante and Randall are able to find happiness in each other and in their environment that has so long beaten them down. After all, it's what Smith has been doing his whole career. Persevering, even in the face of depression, humiliation, and expectation. In a way, I can't think of a more fitting setup for his next project, being about a man coming so close to finding himself at the end of his life, being saved by the joy he feels with those closest to him. Took a hell of a long time, but I hope it was worth it because this is probably the longest video I've done since I started doing video essays. A quick shout out to Dean and Logan for lending their voices, as well as Gwendolyn J. Stone, my YouTube sister. All their channels will be in the description below. I also want to give a special shout out to everybody who saw the previews for this video. Chimera Films, Mouse Pounder especially, thank you for being a very loyal viewer. And special shout out to the Renegade Pop Culture crew. They are with the website that I help run, Kiona Tang, and my dearly departed aunt, whom without, I would have never discovered Kevin Smith. Thank you for showing me Dogma all those years ago. It has been a really tumultuous year so far. That's why there hasn't been any uploads since October. But things should be a lot more stable now, and good news, you don't have to wait long for another video. There's a special announcement coming very, very soon. So please subscribe, please join the Patreon if you can, and hit the bell. And I will see you guys next time, very soon. Take care.